The More of Us podcast features real, uncut conversations about life, pastoral ministry, and walking with Jesus. All guests are pastors in the Charis Fellowship, bound by our common commitment to biblical truth, relationship, and mission. We trust as you hear more of us, you'll see Christ among us.
Today on our broadcast, Tim, I'm excited. We have Pastor Ryan Rodeman with us. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you.
After growing up with no religious background, Ryan has experienced radical life change since hearing the story of Jesus from a friend in college. His friend invited him to the Bath campus in 2000, where he later became a staff pastor. He worked with the areas of biblical community, ministry training, and our Grace College program. For years, Ryan shared leadership of the Bath campus, including Adult Ministries and staff development. And in January of 2020, Ryan became the campus pastor of the Ellet Campus. Again, Ryan, welcome to the program today.
Thanks again.
Yeah, we're going to learn a little bit about your life here. I know that you are married to Lori. You have 4 children. You love spending time outside as a family, Frisbee, whiteboards, etc. So I did notice, though, that you are bald, and Trent and I are bald men. I love finding a common ground with someone. So when did you fully commit to shaving your head?
I think it was about 10 years. I think I just hit a decade.
Man, do you have a special razor that you use?
I've been a Mach 3 guy. It's kind of fancy, but it's worth it.
So you use like a razor blade then? Is that the Mach 3?
I use a real one. I do it in the shower.
Oh.
Now, you do that every day?
No, I'm about a 3 times a week guy.
I'm kind of about the same, about 3 times a week. Yeah.
Okay, I'm twice a week, and I just got one of these new electric razors, and I am loving it.
Are you? I'm going to have to try something like that.
I'm with the electric razor. I'm with you, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, the commercial, I rarely see a commercial, and I think I need to have that, but that commercial did it for me. So here I am, and now I'm an advocate. Look at the show notes. Maybe we'll get them to sponsor this podcast.
Having the right tool as we get together in the morning makes the difference, doesn't it, Tim?
That's right. Hey, speaking of tools, I know one of the things that it said on your podcast, it sounds like I'm about to call you a tool. I'm not. Let's strike that from the record. But it says you like using whiteboards, and I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Oh, man, I love using a whiteboard. I think visually, and so when I'm trying to explain a concept or communicate a strategy, the whiteboard is instantly my go-to tool just to get clear about stuff. Even when I'm just reading or studying scripture, even to capture kind of what's happening in a passage, sometimes just draw it out. And so what I found is that in teaching and even preaching environments, when I'm putting things out visually, that people can really follow the train of thought, and it kind of unfolds visually in front of them. And so I think people like the whiteboard more than me at this point. They're like, whatever you want to do, just don't take the whiteboard away.
Multiple colored markers too? Are you?
Yeah. When needed, when helpful.
Just recently, Tim, I was teaching in McLean, the old McLean chapel over, I think it's McLean 100 maybe. And the teacher that was in there previous to me used a whiteboard, but they didn't realize the marker they were using was a permanent marker, not dry erase.
That's the worst.
That is the worst. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. Been using it for years. I went away from a little bit, and then I decided, what am I doing? This is terrible. So I find it's really helpful for folks to kind of have the dots connect.
I do the same. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have ages. We have 4 kids in various ages. How would you define this stage of parenting for you? Because Tim and I, we always like to kind of dig into family and parenting. And so define your stage of parenting right now.
Yeah. So I've got 4 kids between 17 and 11. So I've got a boy and 3 girls. My boy's 17. My 3 girls are 15, 13, and 11. They're all odds right now, right? So as we go, that'll shift. But right now, we're definitely in the thick of the teenage years, rapidly increasing independence, in the older ones. we are having an absolute blast, man. And I think if the early years are heavy on the physical side, this side of parenting, at least in our experience, is heavy on the emotional, the spiritual, the relational. So we spent a lot of time in dialogue with our 15 and 17-year-old especially, talking about life, talking about what matters, talking about wisdom, and we're loving it, man. It's challenging and super fruitful. So I think it's a blast. I was a little bit dreading, I think, this phase. I definitely had a healthy reverence for what may come in this phase, and so far, I will at least say it's been more joy than sorrow. So
That's
we're
great.
enjoying it. Yeah.
Now, are your teenagers, are they involved in sports?
Yeah, my son he plays basketball, and so we homeschool all our kids right now. They actually had a stint. Our two olders had a stint in public school, and then said, "Hey, like we like being connected to some people in activities in public school, but we want to go back to homeschooling." Because they were homeschooled through 8th grade, and so they do like college classes, and then they're homeschooled, and then they're active in my son in basketball. And then my daughters are all in theater, musicals all the time. My wife is musically talented, and so that's her arena. Do not ask me to sing or dance. And I don't really want to act either. So, yeah, but my son's an athlete. He's a basketball player in the thick of his junior year season. So that's super fun.
I had 2 daughters in theater. Now my son is an athlete. I didn't tell you this, Tim. My son joined wrestling.
Oh, I was wondering because it's in between basketball and track. So
Yeah, so wrestling is interesting, but unfortunately, I think he's starting to like it, Tim. I don't know.
Ryan, my 2 oldest are teenagers who drive, and I found that now that they drive themselves, some of those conversations that you talked about being so great, because you get into that phase where you can have really good conversations, I have those slightly less often now because they're driving themselves, and I'm a little sad about it, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense. That in-between time can be gold.
Yeah. I'm going to date this podcast just a little bit, but yesterday we celebrated Valentine's Day. And how did you and your wife, Lori, meet, Ryan?
Yeah, we actually met on, I believe it was our first day of college. So we both went to Kent State, at least started there. I didn't graduate from Kent. I graduated from Moody. But we met our very first day playing Ultimate Frisbee. Not a great story. I love Ultimate Frisbee.
Was she on your team?
I actually don't remember. I just remember seeing her and being like, wow, who's that? And we actually were friends. I wasn't a believer at the time. So we were friends for another year plus. And during that time, I came to know Christ. And we always had a great connection and friendship, but didn't date until I'd been a believer for probably 8 months or something like that. But yeah, day one, that's when I met her. I remember seeing her for the first time.
And so how long have you been married?
21 years.
Oh, wow. So what are ways you show Lori that you love her?
Yeah, so Lori feels super loved if I give her snacks and if I show her love through acts of service. So sweeping the floor or doing dishes or seeing something that needs to be done and doing it makes her feel super loved. She also loves just to share her day and heart and life with me. So just listening and kind of hearing what's going on in her world is in quality time is some of her favorite stuff. So we absolutely love being together and have just enjoyed, I believe, a special ease in our relationship. Our relationship takes work just like every good marriage, but we enjoy it. Like we like each other. You know how that works? Like sometimes there's couples who love each other and that's good and right. And sometimes you're gifted with that. We really enjoy each other and we've been very fortunate. It's an act of God's grace that we get to have that. It's been probably one of the highest joys of both of our lives so far. At least mine, I can say that for sure.
I hope the wives listen to this podcast because don't you feel like trying every single time the men say such wonderful things about their wives and their marriage?
You know, Tim, I've often thought maybe we should invite the wives too. We can have them
right.
both. But then I think we'd have to change this from more of us to Tim and Trent's counseling hour.
Right.
Maybe they'd counsel us. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Ryan, I want to ask you, what's one of your guilty pleasures?
Guilty pleasures. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think like all good dads, hide snacks from our children, right? You ever find yourself doing that so
Yeah.
you don't have to share?
I am not going to incriminate myself on that.
Well, I thought that's why dads liked flavors like butter pecan. Like, who actually likes that? Well, dads do because no one else will eat it. But anyway.
Yeah. Lemon starburst and, all the things nobody else wants becomes your favorite.
When you have teenagers, you have to hide your food. It's gone.
I know. It's just a real thing. Yeah. So the occasional Sour Patch Kid or snacks are definitely guilty pleasures for me.
Nice. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your call to ministry, your ministry journey. But as we read your bio, one of the things that you point out there is that you didn't grow up with a religious background. And so I'd love to hear the story of how you met Jesus beyond you were invited to church.
Yeah. I'd love to tell that. I love telling the story. So let me give you just a smidge of background of my family. So my great-grandmother was Catholic. My grandmother left the Catholic Church. She went to Catholic school and everything, and then kind of disconnected from that practice and from any personal faith throughout her life. My mom was raised with no religious background, and then I was raised one generation removed from that. And so very, very, very disconnected from any form or function of faith practice. And so I would have grown up with an unclear view of what I believed as far as any kind of real faith background. I probably would have called myself, and I did call myself, an atheist, although, this was like in teenage land. So I would have, in times of trouble, I remember finding myself praying, but in times of arrogant arguments, I would claim atheism, and so the way that it worked out, I grew up in a bit of a broken family situation. So there's multiple divorces in my family situation. And so that left me trying to figure out, who am I? What am I here for? What am I doing? Where does my worth come from? Where do I belong? Right? All those big questions that kind of young people are asking all the time, no matter what. And I would answer those through, I think, kind of the means that our culture tells us to. So sports, I got into a vein of sports running is actually what I landed in. So tried to pursue that pretty hard. I did well academically. I found value and worth from those two things, and then kind of my social circle. And when I left high school, I'm displaced from all of that and put into a new pool of 20,000 people when I went to Kent. And so I found myself trying to re-answer that question. Everybody there, or many of them, are kind of similar to me, that they had their own version of the same thing that I came from. And I kind of felt like I was starting over. And I was very tired trying to chase and build an identity for myself. So that first year, my freshman year of college, was pretty some violent processing happened there, trying to really figure out who I was, what I'm here for again, and kind of started to lose my way a little bit, and felt it. Lost some family members. Some of my older family members started to pass away, and I had all of a sudden an openness where arrogance used to be. And so, long story short, is I started to kind of bottom out. I found a job that I really was enjoying, actually in sales, was doing really well in it. I had some good cash, in the bank, and everything seemed to be going well as far as the outward goes. But internally, I was just kind of thrashing around, trying to figure out why should I get out of bed in the morning. It's kind of how I'm built. Is I think we all are, but I really need a purpose to function, and didn't have one anymore. And so it was June. What would this have been? June of 2000. I was on a big road trip with my buddy, and we were going to go get awards for the same job that we shared. And then we're going to go on a road trip to go try to be down in spring break down in Myrtle Beach and go on this massive thing to, try to hook up with girls. That was the stated purpose. And so we were doing this, and I was like, this is horrible. I do not enjoy this. I've got to get some stuff figured out in my life. And ironically, my buddy was a claimed follower of Jesus that really wasn't practicing, but really at least, cognitively believed the gospel.
Okay.
And so he said, I think what you're looking for is Jesus. And have you ever really considered becoming a Christian? And I was like, no way, man. I said, and I had no idea what I was talking about. I said, there's no way if I say yes to Jesus, I'm going to be a priest or something. That was what I said to him right away. And of course, not knowing really what I'm talking, I just knew I'm going to go all in if I kind of surrender to a decision like that. And long story short, in my buddy's Ford Explorer on this big road trip, I made a decision to give my life to Christ and receive his forgiveness for my sins, and barely knew what I was doing, but I was in.
Yeah.
I had enough information to make a decision. And we pulled over at a gas station, and I prayed and just remained silent in prayer for about 10 minutes. And I knew something radically had shifted in me. And so from that time on, a whole new trajectory in my life was formed, and became kind of a radical transformation from there.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. I love just retracing what you're talking about, like this need for identity and purpose and belonging, which I think is true for everyone in that adolescent phase, but then looking at some of your family brokenness and just, I need a purpose. And then for a friend who's not even like a close follower of Jesus at that point, to point you the way. How gracious God is to move you toward him in that moment.
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question, that friend, are you still connected to that friend?
Oh, yeah. He was best man at my wedding, and just played ultimate frisbee with him last week.
Oh, that's
and
great.
He really, what was fun is when I said yes to Christ, we kind of grew in our actual discipleship to Christ together. And so his life turned at the same time mine did. And it's been, we've been friends for, I guess it's probably about 30 years now.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Ryan, we all have things in our past and trajectory that kind of propel us and kind of shape us in ministry, that maybe come, I don't know, what are the passions, the mantras, whatever. But you shared some of your background and how you were struggling, and some days you're an atheist, but you'd still pray in troubles. With all of that and all of your background, how has that shaped your passion for pastoral ministry?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you, I'm so grateful today, because when somebody talks about brokenness in their family, I deeply understand what it's like to not grow up really knowing your dad. I know what divorce feels like, at least in everybody's unique, but I understand the difficulty and pain that can be involved in a divorce. I know what it feels like to feel lost. And that has been, God has redeemed that to be a tremendous gift, to speak to people who are searching, in describing the experience of lostness. And I can say with, complete conviction that what you are looking for, I believe with absolute certainty, is Jesus. What you need to hear is this message, and the person you're looking for is Christ. And he's got all the rest of the answers that you're actually longing for. And I can know that personally from my experience. And that's been, that story has been an incredible tool for me to relate with a variety of kinds of people. So yeah, in retrospect, I'm deeply grateful for what God has given me in that story.
Yeah, your life is a whiteboard, man. It's
Yeah, man.
it's God tells stories through our lives. That was the work I did when I went back to school recently, in the power of testimony. And part of that testimony is your conversion story, where you first met Jesus, and then how he keeps showing up in our lives too. These stories are so powerful.
Yeah, the most powerful thing we have is our own story. Jesus changed me, and he can change you too. Hey Ryan, so we kind of hear your narrative of, you didn't know Jesus, that internal struggle, then how your friend introduced you. Now the next phase is describe some of those early stages of your training and involvement in vocational ministry.
Yeah, I really had a very fortunate situation develop for me. So my friend was connected to the youth group that Jeff Bogue was leading, who's our senior pastor here at Grace. And Jeff had just transitioned to being a youth pastor to starting what we call now the Bath campus of Grace Church. And my friend knew that Jeff had started that and hadn't really connected to it yet, because he was kind of off the rails a little bit. And so we jumped right in as that campus was getting started. It had been going for, I think, 9 months when we started. So there was about 150 people maybe at the Bath campus at the time that I started attending. And so I showed up there, and I had to get used to church, which was massive. It took an enormously long time for me to feel comfortable and to figure out what was going on. But as people understood my story, I was really surrounded by mentors. Some of the elders there at the campus really poured into my life and took an interest in me, even when I was frankly just kind of a train wreck morally, as I was just learning what it meant to follow Jesus. And then pretty quickly, as that story and my passion for Christ and began to be known, I started to get opportunities to teach and to lead and to do some different things. And so I was mentored, and then I was given opportunities or experiences to begin serving right away, whether that was teaching or jumping in and just being a part of the college ministry there. And then I remember I got mono. I was at Kent State at the time, and I got a really bad case of mono. I had to drop out of college for a semester. It was a pretty rough version of it. I remember sitting with Jeff and describing to him what I was experiencing, and internally, I'm like, I just can't stop reading the Bible. I feel like I just want to tell everybody. I'm just describing all this, that I feel like I can't do anything else with my life but talk about Jesus, and I want everybody to know, and blah, blah, blah. He's like, man, I think you might be called to ministry, and I was like, Jeff, I don't even really totally know what that means. What do I do? And he directed me to start taking classes through Moody Bible Institute, where we had a local extension of their undergrad program. So I was able to grab that educational piece alongside the experience and the mentoring. And that just created a greenhouse of growth for me that really helped me thrive. I was able to learn and really get deep in the academic side, put things into practice and experience, but then also let that get very personal in a mentoring situation where somebody could see my life and my character and speak into that. So I feel like that was the ideal scenario for me. Very grateful for how God designed that and how Grace Church kind of facilitated that pretty organically at that point, but nonetheless was used very powerfully in my life.
You mentioned mentors a lot here, and you mentioned elders, you mentioned Jeff. Anybody else that you want to mention? And then also a little bit more specific on that. What did that mentoring look like? You did say there was organic elements to it, there was platforming, but anything else you can give? Because there might be guys out there listening to this thinking, I want to mentor a young guy and see if I can't move him toward ministry.
Yeah, for sure. Another guy that God really used, Ezra Wimberly. He was a couple of years ahead of me, so it was nice. He was accessible in that way, as I could kind of imagine myself in that next step. Jeff's about 10 years older than me, so he was a few steps down the road. Ezra was very helpful in that, and we had regular conversations, about ministry, and kind of he could give open commentary in a loving, but sometimes direct way, and it was needed directly at that point, especially feedback, into my character. At that point, my posture was, I was kind of like, Ezra, I don't have any idea what I'm doing. I mean, it's all so new. If I'm doing something crazy, just tell me. And because I'm still learning what it even means to function and to be, in the local church. And then as ministry started to get clearer and that calling erupted in my life, that mentoring continued. And I would say it was just a little bit along the way, more than anything. There were some meeting rhythms that helped us to have more organic conversations, but there wasn't like a curriculum that I could point to at that point in our journey. It was more watching my life and then helping to steer based on what I needed.
And you've served in a variety of ministry roles since you first started. So can you walk us through what are some of the different ministry roles that you've had, and maybe some things that you've learned in those different roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I my first kind of step into ministry was a part-time role. It was kind of an ad hoc, kind of cobbled together internship that we technically called an administrative assistant, which I was terrible at. But Jeff was gracious to hire me before I finished my undergrad, kind of pulled me onto the team. In that role, I really learned submission, and I began to understand how to trust God under someone else's leadership. And for me, I'd been very independent, very much, if I'm going to make it, I have to trust me to make it through something. And so that was an important lesson. From there, a massive door opened for Lori and I to be involved together in something called the 412 Commission, which lasted for 2 years. So our first full-time role was developing, it's kind of a leadership development program that was very intense. We got to develop that from the ground up. Didn't exist. And so we got to do kind of all the legwork to get that off the ground, which was fantastic. I think a part of what I discovered in that was a bit of an entrepreneurial bent in me to start and get something moving. And another piece that was I learned a ton in those couple of years. I felt like I got 5 or 6 years worth of ministry experience in 2. But I really started to understand how people grow and what stunts growth in people in Christ, and the deep impact of believing lies and damage from our past, and how all those things can kind of work together, and how the enemy can use that, and how God wants to set us free from some of that. And so really how people form spiritually, I got to see firsthand in a smaller group of people in a pretty concentrated way. That was really helpful.
We could do a whole podcast on that, don't you think? I mean, that would be so rich, so rich. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just like, yay, amen.
Yeah, I have a lot of amazing things God taught me and continues to teach me down that road. But then I switched gears. Jeff and I had a lot of conversations and landed with a spot on the Bath campus team then as a pastor over working with biblical community, right? Spiritual formation, biblical community. And so essentially I oversaw our life groups and all of our adult classes and kind of that whole area of ministry. And that was an absolute blast. I got to really see how healthy spiritual leadership can really help a local church to thrive at a lay and volunteer level, and I had a good 5-year run of that. We got to see 20 groups multiply up to 60 with 1,000 adults involved in those 60 groups. And it was just an incredible run to watch God move in those ways. And then my roles shifted again to overseeing all of we call them Adult Ministries, and was more of a bit of an executive role, preaching more and overseeing more staff, and seeing the campus from a whole. And so my vantage point changed at that point, and I started thinking much more about the entirety of the church and what that global view looks like. from a different seat. And so I kind of expanded my vision during that time and really learned to preach. I preached occasionally during those first 5 years. I preached a lot in that next section. And when Jeff wasn't there, I would often be kind of his teammate in that way, and would preach 15 to 18 times a year at our Bath campus. And then the final role here, I was an interim as I shifted in my executive role there, an adult ministry role. Part of that was to help this campus that was struggling, that was called the Ellet Campus at the time. We since changed the name to Akron East. But I was the interim for about 10 months. God did some really intense pruning in my life during that season. And the long and short of that is he called us to go and stay there, which was not the plan. That was not my plan. Evidently it was God's plan, and that caused enormously difficult in a bunch of ways, but really, really good things have come out of it. But it was perfectly timed to take the entirety of my family and deepen us in our abiding in Christ. And I think to release some attachments, from our situation and things that we relied on, we didn't really even know we were relying on, and really deepen just our soul reliance on Christ. And it's been incredibly fruitful. It was painful a handful of years making that transition. Now on the other side of it, I'm seeing an enormous amount of fruit in myself, in our family, and then in the campus that we get to serve. And so grateful for all of that. But all those seasons had difficulties to them. This one may have been up there on the top of the list.
So looking at your current role as a campus pastor, what are some of the roles and the responsibilities you have with that?
Yeah, sure. So I get to great privilege of communicating God's word on the weekend, the majority of the time, casting vision, discerning that vision, obviously with the Lord and with a small team, raising up leaders, and continuing to invite people into that. And so those are the main ones: overseeing staff, kind of everything probably a senior pastor would do, minus the the financially administrative sides of it. Our campusing model is beautiful in that it lets a campus pastor kind of do the senior pastor, quote unquote, stuff without carrying the burden of the administrative side.
Without having to worry about the budget. That sounds like a pretty good gig, Tim.
Yeah, really. So do you preach live there at Akron East?
Yep, I preach live there.
Okay.
And every campus we are responsible for the financial health of the campus, but we don't have to organize it, or figure out how to do payroll or any of that. That's all organized internally, which is great. Really, our campusing model is almost more like a network of church plants than anything else.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of talk around campusing because your church network's doing that. There's some churches in Columbus doing that as well. And then there's the traditional church planting model. And there's benefits and there's challenges to each one. But I'd love to hear from your perspective, because I think campusing is really strategic in reaching new people for Christ. What would be some pros? And then maybe a con or two, if you want to share that.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Absolutely. I'd love to be objective about it. I personally, of course, I have a bias. I am very excited that we structured campusing the way that we have. I was a major, I loved the setup that we landed on, as I think it helps a local church to retain the kind of leaders that would go and lead a church without having to lead it, which is kind of a big deal. And it also allows those gifts to flourish a little bit unhindered because some of those other components are taken care of. Some of our campus pastors are probably more apt to be able to, they could do anything a senior pastor would do. Others would really deeply struggle to solve some of that. So that's a huge help. I think it helps us to maximize the giftedness of the members of the body that we have. I think it helps us to reach different segments of our local community. Like we have 6 campuses, all within probably a 30 to 35 mile radius. So we're able to cover quite a bit of ground and give those communities, a solid local church in their area, so that you're not driving across town if you don't want to. You can't invite friends. So there's a lot of benefits that way, where we can continue to multiply. I also think it helps us to not just get bigger and bigger and bigger at any one location. Some of our locations are very large, but there's even in those, it puts a bit of a healthy cap in some ways to growth, because our stated hope and prayer and goal is to start more churches, more campuses, rather than to grow into some, Mongo single location. So
I think the word Mongo.
Mongo.
I know that.
Yeah, right.
We're designing different modalities for church growth here at Grace, so maybe we need the
Mongo Church.
The Mongo Church.
Yeah, I think that's a new vocab word for sure. Yeah.
Hey, Ryan.
So I think there's far more strengths for sure. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So on those campuses, you do live preaching. Is there live praise and worship as well?
There is. Yep. Yeah. From the outside, if you came in and experienced a weekend, and didn't know kind of the backstory, you would just think this is a completely autonomous local church. Live preaching, live worship, children's ministry, the whole thing. It's all local. And even if you went to all of our campuses a weekend, none of us, it'd be a very, very special occasion if all of us were preaching on the same thing. We would have done that intentionally. That almost never happens. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes we steal each other's sermon series, and we do that with great pride. But that's all based on the need of the campus at that time. We don't even know often what the other one's preaching on in a given week. So
what you will find across the campuses, though, is very similar language as it relates to the DNA of the church, the driving
100%.
values of the church. Sure.
Yeah, values, mission, DNA, kind of core goals are all shared. Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, let's talk Grace Fellowship here just a little bit, the Charis Fellowship. Sure. And Grace churches have a great list of core values. Share with us one or two that are most important to you and why.
Yeah, as far as what our Grace Church values would look like. I think we have 8 of them. 2 that I really love and appreciate, although I value all of them. Making Jesus make sense is a massive one. It's probably our leading value, in that we, as a local church in a community, are really thinking about communication. When we communicate the Bible, when we communicate the gospel, we're trying to communicate that in a language that is understandable to the people we're speaking to. So we want to make Jesus make sense. And so that changes how we talk. So we'll teach incredibly deep theological realities, but we'll do it in as low-level language as we can possibly tolerate to make Jesus make sense. And I love that. That's a huge one. Another one is we do hard things. So we purposefully move towards the area where other people are kind of running away from. And we want to square off with decisions and investments that are the most fruit-bearing. And so that makes us continually steer towards difficult decisions, whether that's difficult locations to move towards or different investments to make. And seen God bless that in a bunch of ways.
I've heard the list of values before, at least some of them, when I've been in settings with either Jeff Bogue or maybe Joe Caruso. And there's another one, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, be predisposed to say yes to Jesus. Is that one?
I think that's probably some under language in one of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that heart of that is definitely.
I've always liked that idea. I've heard him say something to that effect, and it's motivating to me.
Yeah, Jeff's got the predetermined yes. Is,
yeah.
is a language that he weaves in a lot. It's a really good one.
Okay. Well, the last part of our conversation, we do like to talk about your walk with Jesus. One of the things we're covering is, hey, we're connected in the Charis Fellowship. We have these ministry stories, but we're men, we're husbands, we're fathers before anything else. So we've talked through those elements, but your walk with Jesus is at the core. I love the way that you walked through your different ministry roles and wove in the language of spiritual formation and what God was teaching you. And so you've in some ways answered this question a little bit. So I'm not just going to say what's God been teaching you about yourself in the last 2 to 3 years, because you already mentioned how it was hard making that change and God did a lot of pruning. So if you could give us even a little bit more about, like, tell us how to go through a pruning process. How did you get yourself to the place where you'd let God prune you, you would abide in him? So sorry if my question's a little cluttered. I'm just trying to build off what you've already said, and I'd love to get a little more clarity for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries at all. I wish I could say that I did it very, very well, but I didn't. I always say when I'm in the middle of a trial or, being pruned, I think this can be synonymous at times. I often don't realize it until, I'm a little deeper into it than I would be proud to say. Usually I'm just like, what is happening? And I'm like, oh, right, God is doing something that's probably really important in me. And that's exactly what played out this time. For me, during this deeper season of pruning, I really went pretty deeply introspective. I did a lot of work trying to figure out how God had wired me, worked through some things with the Enneagram, did some kind of deep soul searching on what I really believed, and asking God, what am I called to, what do you want to do with me? What am I called to do? What am I doing here?
Yeah.
Deeply assessed. This was, I think, an important piece for me. Deeply assessed, really opening my hand fully for ministry and full-time ministry, and released that, even to the point of saying, Lord, I don't need this. I don't need ministry. If you want me here and you want to use me, that's your decision. But I am releasing this. I'm releasing my grip on any specific role, on any specific location. Even if this is costly, I'm in. Getting to that point took a lot of tears and a lot of getting really honest with some trusted friends. I can be a violent processor, so I'm grateful for the few people that walked that through with me. A few of my closest friends I've had, one of them led me to Christ, who I mentioned already. Another one, Tony Lavigny, has been, we've been accountability partners for upwards of 25 years. So those relationships helped me to have a safe place to, quote, violently process, where I wanted to run and do some Jonah, and I wanted to hide. I was all over the board, truly. I wish I could just say, yeah, God asked me to do something hard, and I was like, yes, Lord, right from the beginning. That is not what happened. So after all the flailing about and kind of looking within, eventually I got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm in. Whatever you want, I'm in. And at that point, it was sheerly an act of obedience to move forward in that role. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. I think God kind of supernaturally blessed our situation. Sometimes it feels like almost in spite of me. But I think what God was doing in me was so important for the rest of my journey, I think, in ministry, and to be used to be able to remain in a place where I don't need it. And I think that's an important ministry message, because ministry can become, we all know, I think we know this, right? That it can become idolatry.
Yeah.
And it can drive. And, I think in some ways there were pockets of time where that had been the case, and the Lord wanted to work that out of me. And I'm grateful that He's continuing to do that.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that explanation.
Yeah.
In ministry, we need margin. And want to ask you, and Tim and I, we like to ask our guests how they deal with these topics and issues to stay healthy and thriving in ministry. but what safeguards do you put in place to avoid burnout or despair or, any type of a negative mindset in ministry?
Yeah, and I love that question. Lori and I, we mentioned we homeschooled, and we built a bit of a Sabbath rhythm. I'd say it's definitely more principle, than law, but that has served both our family and our marriage, and I think our souls very well over the last couple decades. So that principle, just taking a day and principling to not do any work. Of course, emergencies come, blah, 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 but you get the idea. Now that's been a huge one. The regular connection to a trusted friend. I cannot say how much it's meant to me to have a brother or two to be able to go to, and we've done that consistently for a couple decades. I definitely would have quit. I think he would say the same, over those periods of times where we've fought for each other and fought for longevity and fought for our own souls. Another piece for me that's been vitally important is journaling. Some things just come out differently when I can get honest on some paper. That's huge. I need time alone. I'm an introvert. So personal retreat, going on a hike, that stuff's massive. I mentioned ultimate frisbee. I just recently have learned this about myself. I need a little bit of space just to play. I don't need much. I'm not that guy, but I do need a little bit. So I started playing ultimate frisbee in spite of frequent injuries for, a couple times a week. And that has been really fantastic. So those are a couple, shotgun answers for you there and my marriage has been a massive source of joy and encouragement and safety as well. Those are a few that come off the top of my head.
No, those are great. My wife and I have been moderating our Sabbath practice. We've had a date day on Fridays where we don't do any work, but we've been integrating our teenagers into it a little bit more frequently in the past few months. And so when you mentioned family Sabbath, I'm like, yeah, because Sunday's not that way for pastors. I mean, it can feel like a fly solo day, or we're all spread out doing our own volunteer ministries, whatever role you have. So being able to establish that at a different time of the week where your family gets to delight together and rest together, that's great. So finish the statement without using Sabbath or accountability, because you've mentioned those, or journaling, unless you want to give us more detail on them. My go-to spiritual disciplines are...
Yeah, I would answer that question. I say it, living life with Jesus every day, abiding in the practice of trying to realize that Jesus is here with me day in and day out drives my devotional, quote unquote, devotional life, in keeping that relational frame and reality present. That has been the thing I've been trying to live in for the last 2.5, 3 years, maybe a little longer than that, living life with Jesus every day.
Do you have ways to remind yourself of that, Ryan, throughout the day? Like a simple prayer that you pray, or, yeah.
Yeah. The ways that I'm leaning into is the obvious ones, of course. Anything I can do to get scripture in my heart and mind and connect it relationally to this is God speaking to me and he is with me. I think that bent, it's not just an academic exercise. This is a relationship, is a piece. And then for me, initiating prayer. I've been working on, I'm not always the best at initiating prayer, either personally with Christ, just go for it. I tend to, again, I'm an independent guy, so I want to solve things myself. So trying to make that my first response instead of my last resort to initiating prayer with others, rather than me solving your problem, which I really want to do. I want to bring you to Jesus. I'm going to initiate prayer. And so, and then blessing others has been the third one. Trying to find active ways to realize God is pouring out his love in my life, and I want to take that love and bless others with it. That's what Jesus is, that's what he's doing, and that's what he wants to involve me in. And so those are some simple, very simple, but I think very profound ways, especially when we think of it, approach it through the abiding conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, Ryan, we've got a wide group of listeners today within the Charis Fellowship. And, some churches after COVID are thriving, some are struggling, and, some pastors are achieving some great things in ministry and seeing God do some great things, and others are still believing God for their ministries. In your own personal life, how have you seen God's strength come through for you in some difficult times?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. His strength, I think of the most challenging time of what I just described, walking through this season of pruning. And I think God's ability to bring life out of death, to really revive, like my passion for ministry, there's a time there where it died. And I thought, I'm literally just white knuckling it, holding on. I am here out of sheer obedience to you, God. And today I can say, and it surprises me a little bit, I have more passion for ministry today than I have in the last 10 or 15 years. And that was not the case just a few years ago. And so I'm amazed at how I know it, right? I know God can do that in my head, but to experience it in my life and to know, okay, even when I don't feel or it doesn't seem like any of this is making sense, to know that he has the ability to revive and to cause things to flourish or revive again. During those pruning moments, everything just looks like a massacre because things have just been cut away. And to know that he's doing that out of love, and that new life and maybe even more life is gonna thrive through that is a powerful encouragement to me.
We're at the last question, and I've really enjoyed hearing your answers. I feel like my soul is connecting with your soul here, and I'm going to change the last question.
Okay.
Just in light of some of the things you just said, both to Trent and to me. You're learning to bless people. You're feeling revived in ministries in ways you couldn't possibly imagine. And I would love to just actually close this time by blessing you. Can I do that?
Yes, I would love that.
This will be familiar. We're pastors. We know this, but I want to say this to you. The Lord bless you and keep you, Ryan. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift his countenance on you and give you rest in Christ Jesus, our Lord. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, guys.
Appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you so much for your insights. I know our listeners are going to enjoy it as well and be blessed. Thanks again, buddy.
All right, thanks.
This is Dr. Trent Lambert from the Center for Thriving Leaders at Grace Theological Seminary, along with Pastor Tim Sprinkle from Leesburg Grace Church. Thanks for listening to our conversation with Ryan Rodeman.
More of Us podcast recognizes that we are not alone. We lead best when we walk with others. Join us for more of these talks by subscribing today. And may the Lord bless you, listeners, as well, and keep you.